I know with sensitive kids, they might look fine all day long, but they are not fine. They are constantly having things load into what I call their emotional water pitcher. Welcome back to Raised Resilient, where I help you end the constant meltdowns without punishments, bribes, or yelling, and even if you've tried it all and nothing has worked. I'm Dr. Hillary Manzik, clinical psychologist, parenting coach, and mom of 3 kids who feel everything deeply. And I'm so glad you're here. So my baby girl, my youngest of 3, started kindergarten 2 weeks ago, and I want to talk about it because this is such a big transition, especially for sensitive kids. But for my daughter, even I was surprised at how much this transition has affected her. So I want to talk to you about how I've supported her, how we've navigated this transition, but most importantly, what am I actually looking for in terms of how she's doing? What am I actually paying attention to? Because I think it might surprise you. I think a lot of times we look for, do they separate from us okay? If there are tears at drop off, we worry and we feel like they're not handling it well. We might look for signs of them not liking their teachers or their peers. But here's the thing that I think you all need to hear, and that is that sometimes they can go to school and separate from you just fine. They can do great while they're at school. And that doesn't mean that this transition is not massively loading onto their stress system. This transition is majorly affecting their nervous system, and they're carrying so much, but we might not always see it. And so I wanted to do this episode because I know a lot of you also have kiddos transitioning to kindergarten. I would say about half of my clients right now in the Chaos to Connection program have rising kindergartners. And I do as well, and so many of my good friends. So I know this is a big deal. And you know what? Every year there's going to be a group of you with kids transitioning to kindergarten. So while I am in it and while it is fresh for me, I want to give you some ways to think about how to support your sensitive child in particular through this transition so that they can truly thrive. So let's talk a little bit about what is happening for your child in the transition to kindergarten. And I have a whole other episode on kindergarten readiness and the actual things you need to be looking for because it is not academics. So if you have been doing flashcards with your child and trying to make sure they know their letter sounds, or if you've been worried about, my child doesn't know all their letter sounds yet, or they can't count as high as some of their peers, do not stress about that. Your child's kindergarten teacher will take care of that. The bigger stuff that we want to make sure we're looking for in terms of kindergarten readiness has nothing to do with academics. So definitely go back and listen to that episode if you haven't already. We will link it in the show notes for you. But let's assume that your child is ready for kindergarten from a social standpoint, from an emotional standpoint. You know that they can handle it. You know that they did well in preschool and they're ready for this big transition. And I could not say that more strongly about my daughter. Like, she is one of those kids that there is no challenge too big for her. She has never shied away from something hard. She taught herself to ride a bike when she was 4, just picked up the 2-wheeled bike and said, I'm doing this today. Whereas both of my sons waited until they were 7 or 8. And of course, they could have done it physically way earlier than that. But it took until they were 7 or 8 for them to feel the confidence and to really feel ready to pick up that bike and try it. But my daughter has just always kind of been a different breed. While she feels her feelings very deeply, she also has always just sort of had this energy of readiness about her. Like, I want to do this thing. I want to try this thing. So unlike my boys, who both started preschool at age 4, one because of COVID and the other one because we had just moved and he had just gotten a brother, she started at 2 because she saw her brothers going to school and she was like, I want to do that too. So we sent her to 2-day-a-week, half-day preschool, and she loved it. So then when she was 3, we sent her to a new preschool because it's where my nanny's daughter went to school and my nanny was going to take her, and it was a better preschool. And there were lots of reasons. It was a little further from home, but I wasn't the one having to take her because I was taking my son to school at the same time. So it worked out. So she transitioned to a new school for the 3s, and she went for 3 days a week instead of 2, and she did awesome. She transitioned to a new school, no problem. Then for the 4s, she went 4 days a week, 4 half days a week. New teachers, same school, But again, she just handled the transition like it was nothing. She's also been doing intensive, high-level gymnastics since she was 3. She was pulled out of the little Mommy and Me rec program, and they said, we see some promise. And so they pulled her into a pre-competitive track. And these kids work hard. Half the time, we've got some kids crying during stretching or conditioning. It's an intense class. It's not playful. I have a whole episode on this too, because at first glance, it's not necessarily developmentally appropriate. And so it's not something I would have sought out for my kid. But I've followed her lead, and it's something that she loves. And so we have gone with it. But she's now in gymnastics for 2 hours twice a week. And one of those is after school from 6 to 8 p.m. So not only is she starting kindergarten, but she has this gymnastics on top of it. But again, she's been doing this gymnastics track since she was 3, and she loves it. She has thrived. Never once has she said, I don't want to go, or I don't like this, or it's too hard. So I didn't expect this transition to kindergarten to throw her off as much as it has. Don't get me wrong, I've transitioned 2 kids into kindergarten before. I know it's a big deal. I'm not saying that I thought it was going to be nothing, but I really expected her to just roll with it like she always has. And, she is my one kiddo who I have parented. I've had the privilege of parenting from birth the way that I teach you all to parent. As you know, if you've been listening to this podcast for a while now, you know that I have figured this out as I've gone. My entire parenting approach has come through blood, sweat, and tears, trial and error, and figuring out in real time how to parent kids who have really big emotions, who feel their feelings in really big ways, who feel a lot of shame, who push you away when they need you the most. I had to figure this out. I didn't learn this stuff in grad school, right? But with my daughter, she was born into a world where I was already kind of, for the most part, parenting in a way that I felt good about. So I also feel like a lot of that has prepared her to handle hard things. And so yes, I've transitioned 2 kids to kindergarten before, and they both made it through just fine, but they both did have an adjustment period, right? And I think that's really, really normal. But what I have seen with my daughter for the first time in her life is that this transition is really hard on her. And you might expect that you would see that in very particular ways, right? You might expect that her behavior would get out of sorts. You might expect to see more meltdowns. You might expect that she would struggle with drop-off or have tears, but I haven't seen any of those things. That's not to say we did have one meltdown, and I'll tell you about that, but it's mostly been very smooth. And she's lucky she has the same amazing kindergarten teacher that both of her brothers had. And she goes to the same school as her big brother. And then her biggest brother is right next door at the middle school. So it's a great situation. And she's been coming to this elementary school since she was tiny, walking with us to drop her brothers off or coming to events at the school. So it's not a new place for her either. But I did not realize how much this transition was going to weigh on her little nervous system. So she went for her staggered entry day, which is where they go in a small group for the first day and they kind of get a feel for the classroom and the teachers decide which kids are going to go where. And she went for that and she was like, this is great. I love it. I can't wait to go back. Now, mind you, that was a shorter day. It was like 4 hours, which is exactly what she was used to at preschool. And then she had a day off and then she went for 2 full days and then the weekend. So again, she was like, this is fantastic. I love it. I love my friends. I love my teacher. And then we had our first full week. And y'all, by day 4 of that first week, that is where I did see a meltdown because she was so exhausted. And one of the ways that that's playing out is that even at an early bedtime, she's already overtired. And then she's getting all of these stress hormones, right? Because when we don't fall asleep by the time that our bodies are tired, our body says, here, have some stress hormones. Since you're not falling asleep, let me give you something to give you some energy, right? So we get that second wind and it makes it harder to fall asleep. And that's why it's really hard to put an overtired kid to bed. So we've been seeing that where she desperately wants to fall asleep, but she's laying there like, I want to sleep and I can't. But I'm not seeing any difficulty separating. I'm not seeing, even in the morning, I'm not seeing resistance to going to school. That's not happening. But here's what I am seeing. Let me back up. I'll tell you about the one meltdown that we had because I think that's helpful to understand. She powered through. She did great. She went to gymnastics on Wednesday and then went to school Thursday. And then it was Thursday night. I had to go to meet the teacher at my oldest middle school. And my mom was watching her because my husband was out of town. So I was leaving to say goodbye and she just fell to pieces and it was heartbreaking. She was like, Mommy, don't go. Stay with me. You can skip this. I'm more important. And of course, my son's looking at me like, she's not more important than me. And I'm like having to choose between my two kids. And it's heart-wrenching because if I hadn't had somewhere to be, you better believe I would have just like scooped her up and held her because I knew that's what she needed. But I needed to go to the middle school. It was really important for me to also meet my oldest teachers and like be part of his world. So, because that's a whole other topic, but your older kids really still need you. And I know that my 12-year-old needs me, even though he doesn't always have the same ways of showing it as my 5-year-old. So it was important for me to go. I had to extricate myself from this situation and she's crying and I feel like crying, but I had to stay sturdy for her. And my mom said she was fine within 15 minutes. And she tried really hard to stay awake until I got home so I could give her a hug. But she was so tired, she passed out, fell asleep, and was ultimately fine. So we did see that one kind of meltdown. And remember that a meltdown is not about necessarily the thing that it seems to be about, right? Whatever sets off the meltdown is just kind of that straw that breaks the camel's back. So in this case, yeah, she didn't want me to leave. And yes, she needed me. But it was also just the buildup of all that she had been carrying and managing in this big transition. So again, we're not seeing tears in the morning. I'm not hearing her complain about her teacher. She likes her friends at school. We're not really getting resistance to going to school in the morning. What I am seeing is the exhaustion, the difficulty falling asleep at night, and then that cortisol second wind that then makes it even harder to fall asleep, even though she's so exhausted. And I'm also seeing her needing to cry at bedtime almost every night. Now, I think a lot of times as parents, bedtime is a really tricky time, right? Because we are just done. We're like, let me check out for the day. I've done my parenting. I need my me time. And that is exactly when your child is like, no. One more hug, one more kiss. I need a cup of water. Can you lay with me? Can you stay with me? Right? Because they are about to embark on the biggest separation they're going to have all day long. They're going to be in their room for 12 hours. It's even bigger than school. And you're done. You want to go have an understandable little bit of time to recuperate before you've got to get up and do this whole thing again. So at bedtime, our energy with our kids is just completely conflicting. And so a lot of times we can sort of hurry it along, shut these things down. But I have been consciously watching for the tears to release at bedtime because I know with sensitive kids, they might look fine all day long, but they are not fine. They are constantly having things load into what I call their emotional water pitcher. And so I have seen this with my daughter and what will happen if they don't let a little bit of water out of that pitcher at night through crying and telling you how they feel. That water will build up and build up and build up until it comes out in very messy ways in the form of a meltdown. Now, that's not to say you won't see occasional meltdowns during the transition to kindergarten. You absolutely will, and we have. But it's easy to move back into that pattern of daily meltdowns, of long meltdowns, if we don't know what to look for and how to help our kids let water out of that pitcher in a healthy way, a little bit at a time. So, for example, the other night we were sitting there at bedtime and she started to cry and she said, I hate kindergarten and I never want to go back. And I said, oh my goodness, that sounds really hard. Tell me more about that. And she said, it's too loud in the cafeteria. There's too many kids in there. I'm worried that I'm going to accidentally get lost because it's such a big school. And when we're walking in line, I'm afraid I'm going to accidentally join the wrong class. And then I'm going to be in another class and I won't even know it. And then she goes on to tell me about how her table got silent snack because other kids were talking and how she has to sit there and work. And I do remember that from when my oldest went to kindergarten for the first time. He came home and he's like, Mom, we sit all day long. That's a big deal for your child. Now, you can look at that situation and say, nothing really happened to her, right? The teacher didn't yell at her. She didn't get in trouble. She didn't actually get lost, right? She didn't actually join another class. But this is all the stuff that her body is managing every day. She's thinking about this bigger space. She's inhibiting the impulse to talk out because she doesn't want to get in trouble. And she's watching other kids be spoken to. And she doesn't want that. That doesn't feel safe, right? So she is taking all of this in, absorbing it. It is loading onto that water pitcher, and she is just carrying that with her all day. And she looks totally fine. The teacher just looks at her, I'm sure, and sees this compliant little kid. But she is carrying that with her. And don't get me wrong, that happened in preschool too. But it was a shorter day, and she was able to come home and play, and kids can let water out of their pitcher through play too. That's a really important thing to remember. When we talk about play being the work of childhood, it's not just a fancy saying. It's true. This is how our kids process their stressors. It's how our kids make sense of different things that might not at first make sense to them. It's how our kids integrate new information. It's through play. So that's the other thing I've been noticing is really paying attention to when she starts to play and respecting that as the important work that it is. Because when you go to kindergarten, 7 hours a day, there is suddenly way less space in your day for play to happen. So the other morning, she woke up and started to play with her Barbie dolls. And I went in and I was ready to be like, okay, let's get dressed, let's brush our teeth. And it was very clear when I went in there that that was not what she needed in that moment. And while normally I would have said, hey, let's get dressed and brush our teeth first, and then we play, I could tell that was not going to fly this particular morning. So I said, hey, do you want to get ready now or in 5 minutes? And she's like, 5 minutes. So I gave her that space. I just let her play. And she ended up coming down for breakfast still in her pajamas. Again, not something I would normally want her to do because I don't want to take the momentum and bring it back up the stairs once we've already come downstairs, right? I want my kids to come downstairs dressed for school so they don't have to go back up and get ready. But in this case, it was absolutely what she needed. She came down, she ate breakfast in her pajamas, and then she went back up and she got ready in 2 minutes because her body felt ready to do that. So what am I watching for? I am watching for ways that she is looking to release that water from her water pitcher. And again, for her, that has looked like tears with me at bedtime. And she actually says to me, she says, Mama, I could let my tears out at school, but I don't want to. It feels so much safer to do that with you. Now, why does my kid say those words? How does she consciously understand what I think most kids are feeling but don't consciously understand? Because I've been talking with her about this process since she was tiny, right? She understands the concept of saving our tears for our safe people. And it really has resonated with her since she was 2. So now she can verbalize that. She can say, I could let my tears out with my teacher, but that would be a little bit weird, right? I want to do it with you because I trust you and you're my safe person. So she lets her tears out with me and she looks for opportunities to play. And where I think as parents, we sometimes go wrong is we see those opportunities and we think, stop lollygagging and get ready, right? Stop messing with your Barbie dolls. It's time to move. We got to get out the door. And while that might be true, one of the worst things that you can do, especially during a big transition like this, is to push through those moments and make your child stop playing and say, nope, my way or the highway, kiddo, get ready. Because you are going to spend maybe 5 more minutes. You're going to spend some time here to save the meltdown that you would have if you didn't just give them that little bit of extra time to play. So what I'm looking for is not necessarily the overt signs that she's struggling, because I'm not seeing those. I'm looking for, is she able to release that water from her pitcher in smaller ways as needed so that she can manage through this big transition? And, we could get into a whole conversation about the developmental appropriateness of the expectations in our school system, especially here in the US. But that's a conversation for another day, because I do think it's developmentally inappropriate for a 5-year-old to have to go sit and work all day for 7 hours. But it is the school system we have. And while it needs so much reform, it's what we've got. As of right now, we're going to see this kindergarten thing through. And I do think she'll adjust. And I do think she will start to feel more sturdy through this process. But if you've got a child who is going through this transition right now, or who is about to, they're going to be tired. They're going to be stressed. they're going to be carrying so much more water and you won't necessarily see it. You won't necessarily know what is loading onto that water pitcher. And if there isn't the emotional safety in your home to help your child let that water out in healthy ways, you are going to see meltdowns. And those meltdowns will get bigger and longer and more intense if you don't know how to create the emotional safety to avoid them holding it in until they explode, right? If that is something you're struggling with, I want to invite you to book a free call with me or my team where we're going to talk about exactly what's going on and how to break you out of that pattern of your child white knuckling and white knuckling and white knuckling until they explode out in a meltdown. Because I'm telling you, it doesn't have to be that way, okay? We help families break out of the meltdown cycle in as little as 2 weeks and everybody within the 8 weeks that we work together, truly. So if that's something that you're struggling with, go to raisedresilient.com/breakthrough. You can get the link in the show notes as well and book a call, because we're only going to accept families that we know we can help. So you have nothing to lose, because if we don't think that we can help you, we're going to point you in the right direction. So I hope this has been helpful. I hope that for those of you who are going through this transition right now, first of all, know that it's temporary. Know that you're not alone. I'm right there with you. And you will get through this. But it is imperative that your child is able to let some water out of that pitcher, because it has to go somewhere, right? We cannot ever just hold it in forever. That's not how this works, right? Not as adults and certainly not as kids. So we need to be looking for ways to facilitate our kids letting that water out in healthy ways throughout the day so that it doesn't build up to the point of meltdown after meltdown after meltdown. Okay, I hope this has been helpful. We've got this. Any of you in that transition with me, we've got this. We will get through it. And I will catch you in the next episode.